Today is episode 19 with Dr. B.
Welcome to the Harness Your ADHD Power podcast. If you're looking for a fresh perspective and actionable steps on hot topics from focus to follow through to self-management and more, you are in the right place. Welcome your host, innovative educator, coach, and psychotherapist, Dr. B.
Hey, DDers. I'm so glad that you could join me for today's podcast episode. This episode was inspired by the many conversations I've been having lately about clutter and the three realms: mental, emotional, and physical clutter. By definition, clutter is a confused or disordered state or collection, a jumble, crowded, or a collection of things lying about in an untidy mess. The confused and disordered state definitely defines the mental, emotional, and physical clutter that I'm going to be talking about today. When I think of my clutter from years ago, it was definitely in all three realms. My mind was cluttered with thoughts that I took seriously and I held on to as truth, rather than just random thoughts passing through. My emotions were cluttered with the memories and the feelings of past hurts that were contaminating present-day experiences. And I had stacks and piles of stuff that I hadn't looked at or sorted through in years. I just kept moving them from place to place because I didn't know what to do with them, let alone consider getting rid of them. These three realms of my life were definitely in a confused or disordered state. And as I work my way through thinking about these clutter clusters and how they came to be, as well as how they were going to be resolved, I came up with a few ideas that I'd like to share with you. Since I used to feel overwhelmed a lot when I was younger, I figured out that a lot of my overwhelm came from too much, whether that too much was too much noise or the visual stimulation of too many things that I was seeing in a disordered pattern. Either way, clutter clusters were creating chaos in my mind, emotions, and my physical world. I figured out that crowded was applicable because I didn't have any boundaries for the kinds of things or the amount of stuff that I allowed to come into my mind or my emotions or the space and stay there. Physically, this was especially true of books. They were stuffed in sideways on my bookshelves or stacked on the floor next to the bookcases until I bought more and more bookcases and continued to create more of the same problems. It was a never-ending thing until it was. If I was in a store and I saw something that was interesting, I would bring it home with me, kind of like bringing home all the strays along the way that I saw. I hadn't thought about where they were going to live and how I was actually going to interact with them. I just knew that I wanted to have them with me. As a seamstress, I used to buy fabric that I liked without knowing exactly what I was going to make with that fabric, but I told myself that it would be there when I decided. And I never decided or went back to the fabric to bring it to life in some garment. My mind was cluttered with all kinds of thoughts. Some were catastrophic with the traditional, what if this happens? What if that happens? And I hadn't yet learned to respond to the questions that my mind was tossing at me, so they kept accumulating and created a very cluttered mind. My emotions were cluttered with feelings from the past because I hadn't become self-aware enough yet to examine my emotions and feelings from the past and update them to what was true in the present moment. So I was carrying a lot of emotional baggage for way, way longer than necessary. Through all of this, I had to learn about my values. What did I stand for? What would I fight for or defend? What was negotiable or non-negotiable in terms of my values? I learned that my values were not negotiable because they were core to me, just like yours are to you. And if you're relating to one or more parts of my story here, please know that there is real hope for change for you and the freedom from the many realms of clutter that have taken over your life. How much time do we have? Not much, so let's get to it. As I've said many times before, I'm a work in progress just like you. There's still times when pressing matters come into my life and I get off schedule for keeping cluster from showing up. The difference is that it doesn't stay around for long because I have systems in place to protect myself from ever having those clutter clusters consume me. And since I wasn't born knowing about the systems and the structures that I needed to have in place to protect myself from clutter and keep the free spaces in my physical and internal spaces sacred, and neither were you, so long as you're teachable, you can learn just like I did. We're getting closer to today's 3 important points with relevant stories, an action step, and a favorite quote of mine. So let's keep going. And in case you go feeling like this is going to be so much work and that you've had problems with clutter clusters your entire life and this just isn't going to change for you, is that really the way that you want to continue to feel about your internal and external spaces? Do you want to hold on to all of your past failed attempts as the basis for what you'll believe is possible for you? Or are you going to try moving forward with new tools? I hope you want to move forward. Once you discover what the keys to better clutter control are for you, you're going to be glad that you stayed willing and open-minded. And while you're getting to those keys, I suggest that you cultivate a lot of patience and loving kindness towards yourself, making sure to reward yourself for every little step that you take on this decluttering journey, because you're already hurting from being overrun with clutter and facing it every day in your mind and in your external spaces, and you don't need a bad attitude and doubter to boot. Remember to focus on your wins. That's why I talk about wins over and over again. I want you to remember that you are not what you do or don't do. You're more than that. We are not defective or less than as people, as human beings. We're just wired differently. And the difference is actually pretty cool once you have a different perspective and you have the tools that you need for your own success. In this case, it's whatever you are going to need to consistently do to maintain your inner and outer spaces and keep them clutter-free. In this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at why living with ongoing internal and external clutter can be so damaging to your quality of life and what you can do about it. And knowing is only the first step. The next step is taking action on what you know to start getting new results, to fine-tune your process as you go along and get better and better results. It's a process, so please don't let yourself off the hook here with taking action once, not getting the results you hope for, and stopping there. Seriously, did you learn to walk with one attempt? I know I didn't, so keep going. Today's 3 important points are how external and internal clutter impacts each other, how the inability to keep your word to yourself and choosing again sabotages your best intentions, and how to start your decluttering process, maintain your gains, and keep going.
This podcast is sponsored by Pure Potential with Dr. B. You can head over to drbarbaracohen.com and find the podcast show notes, grade free content from Dr. B, plus programs and services. That's drbarbaracohen.com.
Now back to being an adult with ADHD in today's world. You know it's almost story time, but first, you need a win. You need to remember and acknowledge and celebrate at least one thing that's good about you or has gone right for you today. Just one thing. Perhaps it's you seeing yourself more clearly. That's a win. Or maybe you were able to stop yourself from verbally beating yourself up for a mistake. That's a win. Or maybe you decided to balance out your life and give some time to yourself every single day instead of stealing it from other things. That is definitely a win. Or perhaps you started allowing yourself to be more open to life and feel things again. That's a win. Whatever you choose is up to you. However, I want you to choose something right now and celebrate it, either aloud or to yourself. I want you to have a win and acknowledge that at least one thing has gone right in your day, is right about you, Even if you're surrounded by so much clutter in your environment that you're embarrassed to have people over and can barely get around your space without stepping on things, those facts do not take away from the fact that at least one thing has gone right today or is right with you. You are a precious child of the universe, and you are called a human being, not a human doing, for good reason. You don't have to earn your value. You were born with it. Your value comes from who you are, not what you do. You got it? I hope so, because you're going to keep hearing me say it over and over and over again, because it is so important to your self-esteem. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why you might be buried under tons and tons of internal or external clutter, and I'm going to share 3 stories with you today, as well as talk about your responsibility in this. That's right, responsibility, or your ability to respond, since you're not off the hook here. And I hope that at least one of these stories is going to resonate with you and be of benefit. So let's keep going and shift gears to our first story. Kim knew that she had ADHD and just figured she was handling it. She hadn't made the connection between her ADHD and her mental, emotional, and physical clutter. Her mind seemed to be on 24/7 with random thoughts, ideas, possibilities, and such. I'm sure you can relate. It was never quiet or peaceful inside her mind. She felt like there was no space in time to even consider solutions that her mind could come up with because it was already so full. She had to remember her schedule since she didn't use a calendar or a tracking system. She had to remember what she was responsible for and needed to do for herself and others. She had so many things that she needed to remember and keep track of, and she was constantly thinking of new things and even new challenges or new problems to solve. Her emotions were usually in overdrive and on overwhelm most days, and she didn't have the feeling of peace and quiet inside because her emotions were as busy as her life. And the clutter in her space, it had been growing for years now. Little seeds were planted here and there and sprouted into full-grown clutter clusters. And she couldn't even begin to keep up with the clutter as it had grown to such a monumental size and undertaking. It was kind of like a chicken and egg dilemma. Was it the mental and emotional clutter that was making it impossible to even focus on the external clutter? Or was it the external clutter that was making it impossible for her to clear her mind and emotions? Or was it just a major traffic jam inside and out for Kim? And the worst of it was that it had affected Kim's relationships, meaning that she found that she didn't really even have any friends and felt pretty much isolated. Perhaps her friends had long since abandoned her because they just couldn't stand going over to her place or even getting together, because with Kim, it was tough because she was constantly sharing her thoughts and feelings, and it was hard to get a word in edgewise. Kim was embarrassed about her situation and truly didn't even know where to start. Every place she turned was full. She needed a clear spot to get started, just one little clear spot in her mind or emotions or physical space, and there were none. No wonder she was having such difficulty getting things done. There was no room to think or feel or move anything new, and this had never occurred to her before. She felt trapped and didn't know where to turn. You know, she was familiar with 12-step meetings and the non-judgmental premise of those programs. She had a few acquaintances that she could call, but she was afraid of being judged and made to feel stupid. So she went online and she found a group that said it was for people like her, and she didn't feel so alone in her pain and confusion. Maybe there was hope for her to turn her life around rather than feeling like it was pointless and why bother. Some background facts. Research shows that internal and external clutter feed on each other. I'm sure you already know that. Looking around your external environment and seeing the clutter creates feelings of overwhelm and increased stimulus, and your mind and your emotions, they just can't relax. And with the internal clutter, it's hard to get focused to remove the external clutter because your mind is just too cluttered to think clearly and see the pathways. So what do you do if you relate to Kim's story? Well, we have 2 more stories before I get to some action steps. They're coming, so let's transition to our next story. Charlie had the best of intentions, yet her life was a mess. Good intentions mean nothing if there's nothing to substantiate the intention with actions. It isn't just that she couldn't keep her word to herself. She didn't even remember giving her word until it was too late. Words and commitments just rolled off her tongue and got said. You know. Her friends, they just rolled their eyes when she said that she would take care of something because they knew better. Her habits were so entrenched, and there seemed to be no release from them. She had built the association that whenever it was time to do what she had committed to do, she would rebel and choose again and do something else. It was as if someone else had taken over her mind and her body, and that she wasn't in charge of herself. In a sense, it was true. Her non-conscious mind was in control, which is the one where habits live. They live in the autopilot space. She had one being in her life that she gave her word about and never chose again, and that was her best friend, her canine companion, Flip. There was just something about her feelings, thoughts, or commitment to Flip that made it different than to herself or to her friends, and she wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was Flip's unconditional loyalty to her for the past 10 years. She knew that she couldn't continue on this way. She couldn't keep breaking her word to herself and others, with the exception of Flip. It was disrespectful, it was hurtful, and it just made no sense. It's just that in the moment when it was time to do what she had planned to do or scheduled to do, that she just wasn't in the mood to do it. She wanted to do something else instead that she was in the mood to do. Makes sense, right? When she shared this thinking with a close friend of hers, it was so clear that she was living her life according to her feelings, which changed from moment to moment, instead of by her thinking and her committed word. Charlie didn't think that there was really a difference between what she thought and what she felt, since she could change her mind about thinking just as quickly as she did with her feelings. But after her friend explained to her that she was being so ADD and impulsive by choosing again according to how she felt, she thought about it a little bit more. You know, Charlie had time to think long and hard about whether or not she was going to be willing to change her approach to her life. And if so, this would be a huge shift. No more choosing again? No more choosing according to how she felt? Only choosing according to her thinking and previously made commitments? Oh no! A few background facts. What's the importance of keeping your word to yourself anyway? Such a big deal is made of this, and yet, what's the big deal? The big deal is what you're teaching your brain. That's what the big deal is. If you say that you're going to do something and you don't do it, when you said that you would do it, and how you said you would do it, your brain has no choice but to stop believing you. And stop believing you in terms of what you say is what you do, because it isn't. Your brain has no choice but to stop trusting you and stop believing you. And then, when it's time to do something and you say that you're going to do it this time, your mind's first reaction is, sure, you bet, whatever you say. What makes this time any different than the 300 or 3,000 times before when you said you were going to do something and you didn't? So what do you do if you relate to Charlie's story? Well, we have one more story before I get to some action steps. They're coming. Let's transition to our next story. Phil wasn't raised with any rules or guidelines for keeping up on the normal life stuff, like paying bills, washing clothes, keeping a living space clean and tidy, and stuff like that. He didn't know where or how others learn these things, but he just never learned. As a result, he had to learn because his life was a chaotic mess. But where to start? How do you learn? Who could teach him these things? He found a book on decluttering that broke down the steps one by one. This seemed like a great solution, But he quickly found that it wasn't the entire solution. He was smart. He could read what the book said to do, but he just couldn't seem to get himself to take the steps. How odd, he thought. The information is clear. The steps are clear. All he had to do was take the action, and yet he wasn't doing it. What was wrong with him? It was different when he didn't know what to do or how to do it. He could blame the lack of organization and enormous clutter on the lack of information. But now that he had the information, what could he blame it on? No one and nothing but himself. It was terrible. Again, what was wrong with him? He decided he would map out a complete plan of attack on a large sheet of paper and lay it out so clearly that there could be no problem with seeing what to do and doing it. And so he did that. And still, he got the same result. No action taken. Some background facts. Phil's story is such a perfect example of just because you know doesn't mean you can show. So many different things could be going on with Phil as to why he wasn't getting started with his decluttering process. What was his motivation? His good enough reason to do this? Was it strong enough to pull him forward? Or was it more of an away from strategy, away from the clutter, not towards the beautiful space that he would be creating for himself? What about his mind? Was it cluttered and hence getting in his way of starting? Was he unclear about the steps, even though he knew what they were? What about his feelings? Was he resentful of all the work that he would need to do to get his space the way that he'd like it to be? And how to maintain gains and keep going? What about once it was decluttered? What was his plan for maintenance? Did he know anything about maintenance? Most likely not. What was his motivation going to be to keep himself moving forward, to keep things the way he had gotten them? None of this was known to him. Some action steps. It's your responsibility to get the information and training that you need. In other words, your ability to respond to your needs and to meet them. And the good news about clutter is that it can be released from all three realms and never be embraced again. This is going to require a maintenance schedule for your possessions, the ability to make good decisions based on criteria, the commitment to follow through and complete tasks. It's important to know that the more that you have, the more that you have to maintain. And similarly, the less that you have, the less that you have to maintain. Everything you bring into your life takes a piece of your life to maintain, whether it's a person or an object. I'm going to repeat that. Everything you bring into your life takes a piece of your life to maintain, whether it's a person or an object, which means you want to be mindful of what you bring into your life because you're going to need to maintain it. If you relate to Kim's story, your action step has 3 parts. Is your focus going to be on your internal or external clutter first? You need to decide. In following through, make sure to take your clutter inventory so you know what the clutter is in each of the 3 realms, so that you know what you need to address in each of those areas. And in self-management, there is most likely going to be a lot of feelings or emotions to manage when you first get started with this decluttering process. So be kind to yourself, because this is a huge step that you're taking, no matter what anyone else says. I'm telling you from personal experience and walking alongside others taking this step, it's huge. And the feeling of win is huge too. If you relate to Charlie's story, your action step has 3 parts. Focus takes a little soul searching to determine if you just don't care about yourself enough to take this step, or if it's something else. To keep your word to yourself, you have to honor it. You have to enforce it. You have to place the value on it at the same level as you do with others. In following through, you may need to work with a qualified professional on this issue because it's a tough one. Setting up consequences is good, and then you're going to need to enforce them as well. In self-management, if you're immature, which many adults with ADHD are, you're going to have to make peace with that fact first. You really are. Then really understand that a lot of your behavior is childish and immature, and not just because you have ADHD. It's not the inattention, impulsivity, or hyperactivity at play by itself. It's the immaturity that's causing resistance. If you relate to Phil's story, your action step has 3 parts. Focus on getting started and notice if there is any hesitation or resistance. In following through, if there's none, then have your plan in place for how you're going to declutter step by step and follow the plan until you get to the end. Then begin the maintenance phase of the decluttering process. Put into your schedule when and how and where it will take place. For self-management, this is a very new experience for you and one that takes time to integrate into your life at a deeper level. It can't just be an appendage to your life. It can't be an emotional add-on. It needs to come from within you. Remember, your needs matter to me. If I'm going to help make a real difference in your lives, I need to know what your challenges are and what you're struggling with. And to help me know, I created a quick little survey where you can tell me what the number one biggest struggle or frustration is that you have right now. It's only 6 questions, and you can be as brief or lengthy as you want. It's entirely up to you. The link to the survey is in the podcast description, the show notes, and in today's post on my website. I hope that you can take a few minutes to respond to this survey. Thanks in advance for your participation and for helping me to help you even more. A favorite quote of mine. Eleanor Brown said, "Clutter is not just physical stuff. It's old ideas, toxic relationships, and bad habits. Clutter is anything that does not support your better self." The question I have for you at this point of our journey together is, are you ready to take a clutter inventory to determine what clutter exists in your mind, emotions, and physical space? You need to know what clutter exists before you can make plans to let it go or transform it into something relevant to your life today. I appreciate you showing up to listen today and in the future. New episodes are released twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. And as a subscriber, the newest episodes will be in your feed by 1 a.m. Pacific time. Plus, you won't miss out on any of the extra episodes that I create with special guests. Certainly a good reason to subscribe. And perhaps make a date with yourself to listen to each of the podcast episodes so that you hear your questions answered if you asked any of me, or just enjoy all the episodes where I'll be talking about such compelling topics as making friends, analysis paralysis, seeing the path, and even more in-depth separate episodes as a spin-off from episode 13's multi-level topic. So if you received value today or from any other episode, please share this podcast show with your friends and family, as well as rate the show and write a thoughtful review on iTunes so that I know that I'm meeting your needs. It doesn't have to be anything lengthy, just a line or 2 about how the podcast is helping you, if it is. It means a lot to me to know that your life is getting a little bit better every time we get together. This is a way for me to know. In fact, you can sign up on my website to receive periodic email updates on new happenings with Dr. B, or just download your show notes and learn about other services. That is, if that's of interest to you. And remember the survey if you want to make your needs known to me. Thanks for listening. Until the next time, bye for now.
Thanks for your undivided attention. If you're hungry to make positive changes in your life, head over to drbarbaracohen.com and see how Dr. B can help you today. Whether you love making changes with one-to-one attention and community support, or on your own with self-study, or could benefit from coaching or psychotherapy, you'll find all the information right there at drbarbaracohen.com.